For reenactors, it's all about accuracy. They wouldn't dream of using a 21st century weapon to tell a 20th century story. But historians, they will. And that's why you'll find video screens and robots, even holograms, at museums and historic sites all over the country. Around here, you'll find they've completely rewired U.S. Grant's horse barn. Then, you've got to see what they put in the dining room. It was done, and it was worth throwing a party. After years of work and millions of dollars, the National Park Service in the summer of '07 was unveiling the new, improved Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site. The Park Service in 1990 took over what was then the historic home Whitehaven, the family estate of Grant's wife Julia Dent. The old house is still there and it's open for tours, but there are changes, high-tech features the Grants couldn't have dreamed of. But the real unveiling on this day was the new museum next to the already built Visitors Center. This was the added attraction the Park Service felt was needed here. And if it was successful, they were going to need more parking. And as it turned out, they were able to kill two birds with one barn. In the spring of 2005, they drew quite a bit of attention when they decided to move the big old barn to its new foundation on higher ground. The vacated spot right across from the entrance to Grant's farm would be turned into a big paved parking lot for all the cars and buses they hoped would be coming here. On this day, the story was, would it work? Since barns aren't built to be lifted, there was a chance it would just fall apart. What they did was build a whole new internal structure of beams. That's what the cables would be attached to, and when lifted, the barn would come with it. That was the plan, and it worked. What's important about this barn is not just that it's old, but that it was designed by Ulysses S. Grant himself. After serving as a general and president of the United States, he was planning to retire to Whitehaven. But even though this was his wife's home, Julia Dent Grant apparently preferred life as a New Yorker and world traveler, and they never moved back to St. Louis. It's all part of the story, him and her, their lives, that the Park Service wanted to be told at this historic site. And moving the barn was a big part of that plan. We came back a few months later. Concrete was being poured for the new parking lot, and the barn was undergoing restoration and repairs. It now had a roof and the cupola was back on top, but still there was barely a hint of what they had planned for the inside. So in here, you told me last time you'd have a barn, and that's still the plan?
Yeah.
With a more modern museum?
Yeah, it's kind of a balance between maintaining the barn that Grant had his horses in at one point, but then telling the story of him and his wife here at the site.
So these are the stalls or whatever?
Correct. This is a horse stall that it'll be exhibited as a horse stall. The one over here is a tack room. There'll be items in there displayed regarding the horse's tack, and then some farm implements and buggies over there. So to give them a good sense and feel of the barn as they're first walking into it.
Right.
And maintain the historic...
The people who run historic sites think about this stuff a lot, and it's a tough balance to mix the old and the new. Respect history, but still try to make it come alive, make it relevant, meaningful to a new generation. They want something more than just an old house, something less than a video game. But you will find a little bit of both.
One of the things that we did decide to do is to use a little technology. And so in what we know is the dining room, one of the few rooms, we have what's called a magic mirror that fades into a quick electronic production of a setting that actually occurred here with the slave Mary Robinson and the Grants. One of our biggest stories here are what was going on with the family. Ulysses' father was a huge abolitionist. His wife's father, Colonel Dent, was a Southern sympathizer, fancied himself as a plantation owner. And of course, life with slaves here was very difficult between those two families and how they interacted. So,
one of the things that makes Whitehaven so important is not just the upstairs, but the downstairs where the slaves lived. It's a complex story from a complex time. And that's one reason this rates being a National Historic Site, to preserve that story and to continue to find ways to tell it. But you get a lot of kids coming through here, and I'm not sure kids want to see just an old house.
no, they don't. No, they don't. So any of the interactives that we can get involved in the barn, something to get them thinking about the time and the life with good information and good stories. And also it won't be so overwhelming that the folks who just enjoy walking around and getting information in the museum won't still enjoy themselves.
Won't get in the way of the house.
That's right.
And all
That's
of that.
right. Yeah.
Jim, you in there? I'm in here. Screw it. Screw it. Screw it.
By the winter of '07, nearly 2 years since it had been moved, U.S. Grant's old barn was looking pretty modern inside. Part of it was still being turned into a recreated barn that Grant would recognize. But this part had been taken over by the historians, the interpreters, using new tricks to tell an old story. It must be kind of thrilling to finally see the pieces fall into place.
It's really exciting. It's coming along very well. They're actually a little bit ahead of schedule right now, which is always good to hear after so long and so much work and time and effort that we put into it. It's good to see it going in, but we'll wait and see how it turns out. It's a extraordinarily complex period in American history, and we could have filled another barn's worth of exhibits, but we tried to pick the stuff that was the best for people to get the sense of the period.
The completion of this project marked the completion of the Master Development Plan, the transformation of a local historic home into a National Historic Site. The General and President's Barn is here, and the story of Ulysses and Julia Grant, their life and times, that's here as well.
It's really not dummied down. We've had people spend hours in here, and then beneath us, most people don't know, but we have a full research library and collection storage facility. Children can come in and enjoy it in the children's corner, try on clothes, but if you're a serious scholar, you can come in and really get lots of information here. So we're really trying to become all things Ulysses Grant and Julia Dent Grant.
There were a lot of extras on opening day. There won't always be tour guides in period costumes. There won't always be Civil War reenactors or brass bands on hand. But every day there will be the old house and the barn and the story of people, black and white, who lived here. Enough here that they figure they're going to need that new parking lot.